Hi everyone, so let's continue with our event. It was great to have all those 10 speakers talking about such enlightening things, such practical topics, so helpful, many things I'll use in my lessons next week. And hello, Henrique. That's
Hello,
so nice to have you here, such an honor.
it's my honor. Thank you for the invite.
And you are talking from Thailand, right?
Exactly,
Um, I,
exactly.
I saw on the internet you are 10 hours ahead.
Yes, it's now 6:15 in the morning.
Oh, you had to wake up
Yeah,
early today.
yeah, a bit earlier than usual.
But it is for a
Yeah,
great reason because we are all
definitely.
here to watch you and to hear you and to see um, how you can help us with this new reality, right? The hybrid
Of course.
learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pleasure and an honor.
For us. So, people with you, Henrique Moura. Henrique Moura holds an MA in education from University of Chichester. He is the head of educational development for Seven Educacional and is also a CELTA and Delta tutor and external assessor. In this plenary session, he will explore the principles of active and hybrid learning, understand how they are intertwined, and discuss what role they play in the teacher development that needs to be promoted in the current scenario. With you, Henrique Moura.
Thank you, Andrea. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be talking about hybrid learning, which is a topic that is really dear to me. And well, as you said, I hope you find it helpful and maybe it will give you a few insights. Um, so here today, the plan for this session is to think about possible definitions of hybrid learning. And then we're going to talk about the advantages of hybrid learning and perhaps disadvantages too. What's the models of hybrid learning that we can use in ELT-R? Then we will talk a bit about active learning and possible methodologies which are related to active learning, um, assessment of hybrid learning, and last but not least, we'll talk a bit about user experience, right? So first to get started, I think I'm going to share a bit of my story with hybrid learning. Uh, so why I am interested in hybrid learning and why I decided to talk about hybrid learning. Uh, my story with hybrid learning goes back quite a while. So a few years ago, I think it was 2014, I took the level 4 certificate in online language teaching. And that's when I started studying about hybrid learning and distance education. And then, yes, I went to my MA in education with the focus on professional development for teachers and educational technology. So this is also something I studied. But apart from that, I've been an online learner for quite a while now. So um, a few years ago, I decided to study Italian. And uh, when I decided to study Italian, I thought, well, I think I want to have lessons on Skype. It wasn't very common back then. I think Zoom didn't exist yet back then. And then I thought, well, I want to have lessons via Skype, but I don't know if that works because I hadn't heard much about lessons online. But I thought, well, I'm a teacher. I think I know what I have to do. So I'm going to Google a teacher of Italian who offers lessons on Skype. And If it's good, I continue. If I don't like it, I may look for another teacher, but I'll give it a try. And then I spent a good 5 years studying Italian via Skype with a teacher online, which was definitely an interesting experience. Um, I've also went to college online. So I took a BA online, um, which was also a different experience to what I was used to. But that gave me uh, some of the feelings that students have when they're studying online, and this helps me a lot with online teaching. And my email was also taken on distance mode. So, I've been taking online courses for quite a while now. And I've also been teaching online for quite a while now. Um, I've been doing teacher training online with Salta Online, Delta Online, language teaching online. So hybrid teaching has become part of my routine, both as a learner and as a teacher. But for us to start, I have a question here. What is hybrid learning? What do you understand by hybrid learning? I'll ask you to write a few answers in the chat box. Okay. So when you hear of hybrid learning, what comes to mind? You can write whatever comes to mind in the chat box. Okay. Okay, so we have here the first answer, half online, half in person. Good. So we're thinking about the use of technology here, teaching online, and then we have another possible answer here, a mixture of offline and online strategies, how to carry out tasks, having to teach online and face-to-face groups at the same time. So teaching remotely and in person. Very good. We have lots of interesting answers here. One more, it's the learning that runs on different fuels. Quite interesting answers here. And here we're thinking about usually online and offline, face-to-face and distance, remote and in-person. So we're usually thinking about these dichotomies. But when we talk about hybrid learning in the first place, we're thinking about, there is this quite interesting definition here by Pete Sharma that says, a course with a combination of pedagogical methods, regardless of technologies employed, or to a purely online course consisting of several different technologies. So we can have a course that is hybrid and that is 100% online. So if we, for instance, combine synchronous moments with asynchronous moments, we have a hybrid course. And we can have a hybrid course that does not rely on the internet at all. For instance, if I have part of the course in the library where students go and read and do research, and then they come back to class to share what they found out. We're talking about hybrid learning too. So we have a myriad of possibilities when it comes to hybrid learning that are not always directly connected to online and offline. Although when we talk about hybrid learning in our context nowadays, this is what we have in mind. So hybrid learning in our context, the unprecedented times we've been living, like the name of the event says, we're thinking about this mixture of face-to-face and online learning, like you said. And and here we're just thinking about teaching partly either in person or distance mode, synchronously, and online learning, which can also be understood as asynchronous teaching. But here, Another possible, even when we think about teaching online and teaching offline, a possible understanding of what hybrid learning is thinking about an appropriate balance of face-to-face teaching and technology. So for Sharma and Barrett, for instance, not all combinations of face-to-face and technology-mediated teaching will constitute hybrid learning. The balance has to be appropriate for this to be considered hybrid learning, right? But for the rest of our presentation today, let's think about this definition here. We're talking about a mixture of both face-to-face and online. So here, when we think about mixing online and face-to-face, especially these days with remote teaching and the unprecedented times we've been living, what is your experience with hybrid learning? What have you been doing? Can you please share one or two things in the chat box? So maybe you can talk about tools you've been using, or the experience you've been having. I'll ask you to share a few things in the chat box here, okay? Just for me to have an idea of how much you've been doing in terms of hybrid learning. Don't be shy to share. If you haven't been doing anything, you can just write nothing or haven't been doing much. Okay, so we have a few answers here. Students do their homework on an online platform. Oh, that's quite interesting. That's quite interesting. Having students do their homework as part of your hybrid program. And this keeps us thinking of why, the reasons why we can use hybrid learning. Then we have here one more answer. In the sense of hybrid learning, I don't think I've been doing much, as all my lessons are online now. Yes, but even if all your lessons are online, you could do hybrid teaching if you have, for instance, synchronous and asynchronous moments. If you give them homework to be done online and you're not going to be there with them to help them, there is a blended model there. There is some hybrid teaching there. Very good. Here, then we say, why might we adopt hybrid learning? So like Jaime said, that we could get students to do homework online, and then this makes our teaching hybrid. This is true. But if we think about the reasons why we get students to do homework online, what are the benefits of this? What do we get from this? So here we have a few possible reasons why we might want to use hybrid learning. The first obvious reason, especially at this day and time, is because of social distancing. We cannot be with all students in a classroom, with at least not with all of them at the same time. So this is one of the tools we have to lay hold of. But also because of cost. Hybrid learning might be a cheaper option in terms of offering education to more people, for you to escalate what you do, or in terms of not needing a physical space with infrastructure and everything. So hybrid reduces costs in that sense. Because we might want to optimize class time. So there are things that do not need to be done in class, or things that do not need to be done with the teacher present, at least, because activities are very mechanical, which might be the case of homework, or because activities are very time consuming, or because they require individual concentration for a longer period, which is the case of writing activities, for instance. So you can leave the class time for activities that are more productive, more interactive, more challenging, more practical, and leave other activities to be done online. Uh, but also, we might want to have hybrid learning to offer students even more exposure to the language they're learning, to the additional language, because they usually spend what, 2 or 3 hours in class every week. And if they can do some activities online after that period, this obviously increases their exposure to the language. So this is one of the reasons we might want to adopt hybrid learning. There is the flexibility too, because if we have online components in the course, students don't have to come to class and sit down and study and spend those 2 hours there. Depending on the kind of plan we have, students work around their own time and they can negotiate moments of interaction that um, doesn't have to be the same for everybody. So there are lots of good reasons why hybrid learning are interesting. And also because of learning preferences, there are lots of people who prefer to come to class and sit down and listen to the teacher and take notes and talk to colleagues and share and listen to others, etc. But there are people who prefer to focus and read and take notes and go back and revisit, spend some time alone. So that caters for this different kind of learning preference. And it also complements. You might have the synchronous face-to-face all-together experience and complement it with the online experience. So it's very, let's say, it caters for everybody in a positive way. It's very democratic in that sense. Yeah. And then we might think, okay, I understand the benefits of hybrid learning, but how can I use hybrid learning in language learning? So basically, there are three possible models in which we can use um, hybrid learning in language teaching. Right. The first model is the model we call the flex model, which is what we know as EAD in Brazil. So basically we have content online and the student goes in and studies mostly independently. So the content is self-explanatory. Students can self-access the content. Um, and then they go to class to do other activities, different activities. So maybe they have part of the course online and they come to class just for practice or for tests, for evaluation. It's what we understand as EAD, really. It's called the flex model in literature, right? We have the rotation model, which is one of the active learning methodologies, and we will go back to active learning in a few seconds, but basically this has to do with students studying different parts of the curriculum using different resources. So they might study some part of the curriculum um, through a lecturing class, some part of the curriculum through reading something, and some part of the curriculum through research online. And then the hybrid here is between use of technology and no use of technology, and this can be done on a distance or even face-to-face in class. For instance, if you have stations in which students have to use paper and pen, stations in which they have to talk, and stations in which they have to go to the internet and do some research, interact online. So here it is a kind of hybrid teaching happening inside the classroom, for instance. So face-to-face hybrid. And we have the flipped model, which is also one of the active learning methodologies we talk about a lot these days, which means giving students all the content, all the input online with self-access, and then having students go back to face-to-face or go back to synchronous teaching to practice and implement what they studied individually. And this is the opposite of giving them homework, because usually when we think about homework, we think about giving them input face-to-face. So the teacher is usually the provider of information, and then we talk about that jug and mug model in which the teacher pours the knowledge onto students, or mediates the learning in class or facilitates the learning in class. And then students have homework to practice what was learned, presented. So the focus here is to automatize what they learned, or to expand or consolidate what they're learned. But homework's always the second stage. When we're thinking about flipped teaching, we change the logic. So at home or before class, the students do the research and they learn the content. And then when they come to class, to practice, to interact, to implement what they learned. And then there are no explanations, or there is no input in the synchronous or face-to-face interaction, right? All of these models are possibilities when we think about hybrid learning in language teaching. And then I said, okay, active learning, but what is active learning, right? Active learning is what we call metodologias ativas in Portuguese, and this is a term which is really in vogue. Everybody's been talking about metodologias ativas, active learning, not only in language teaching, but in education in general. And then when we're thinking about active learning or metodologias ativas, it's also important that we have a definition for this, right? So here we start from the definition of methodology, as opposed to the definition of method or approach, right? So when we're thinking about approach, like the communicative approach, we're thinking about a set of beliefs about teaching. We're not thinking about how to do things, but we're thinking about why we do things, the reason behind our choices, our rationales. When we're thinking about method, on the other hand, we're thinking about a series of prescriptive actions that we need to follow. So it's how we do things in a very prescriptive and closed way. But when we're thinking about methodology, we're thinking about not one specific way to do things. We're talking about a set of actions which are guided by the educator's intuition. So it's more about what we think works at each moment and for each of the purposes, based on our background knowledge, based on our experience, based on our beliefs. And when we think about active, we're thinking about action, activity, protagonism, the protagonism of the student, autonomy, right? So here we understand the meaning of the two words to then think about the concept of active learning. So active learning are the actions and strategies that teachers use to help students develop skills such as creativity, autonomy, critical thinking, communication, citizenship, entrepreneurship, etc. Yes, this is what, when we think about language teaching, we've been doing this for ever, right? But the thing is, maybe we do this very automatically and we don't stop to think of exactly what we've been doing. And sometimes we don't break it down to understand exactly what we've been doing. And sometimes we do things as I said, automatically like promoting communication, promoting interaction, promoting motivation. But we forget sometimes that, not that we don't do, but we forget that we're doing this, of making the student the protagonist, and thinking about how meaningful that learning can be for the student to use this in their lives, right? So basically, this is what active learning is all about. And active learning uses a number of different methodologies. And we mentioned two methodologies of active learning before. We talked about the flipped classroom, which is one of the methodologies of active learning, and also rotations. Yes, using rotations is one of the methodologies of active learning. This is one of the metodologias ativas, right? Are you familiar with any other active learning methodologies? So maybe you could share them in the chat tool here. What other active learning methodologies you know, or you've heard of, or you've already used? Okay, so, oops. Can you share them here in the chat? So yes, project-based learning, definitely. Two people shared that. Yeah, we've been doing lots of project-based learning, especially in uh, regular schools these days. Yes, lots of curricula have been based on project-based learning. Definitely, yes, project-based learning is one of the active learning methodologies. So here, I'm going to show you some more that we've been talking about recently. So flipped learning, check. Shared learning. I'm not sure. I'm sure you've all heard of this, maybe not with this name, shared learning, but shared learning is when you have students at different levels in the same group, and students who are a tad more advanced help students who are a bit less advanced learn. So students learn from each other because they are at different levels. So when we're thinking about multi-level groups, for instance, in English schools, this is called shared learning, and this is one of the active learning methodologies. Or even if you think about regular schools, when you have students at different ages, teaching each other, helping and contributing to each other, we are talking about shared learning, one of the active learning methodologies. Project-based learning, like you said. Coding. Nowadays, we see lots of schools that teach students how to code. Coding is one of the skills students will need to develop for the future. And this is one of the active learning methodologies, because through coding, they resolve problems that are relevant to them. So they become protagonists of their learning, looking for solutions to problems that are relevant to them. We have design thinking as an active learning methodology, STEAM, gamification, which is something we've been talking about a lot recently, problem-based learning, mediation. And mediation is quite interesting as a concept, as a learning concept, because there are many authors nowadays who say that apart from listening, reading, speaking, and writing, the four skills, there are two more skills that are fundamental for us to teach our language students, which are translation and mediation. Mediation, in this sense, means that as speakers of an additional language, we need to be able to mediate the communication between two other speakers. So usually what happens is you have two speakers of an additional language who are at a different level, and at times they're trying to communicate and can't really understand each other. You, as a third speaker of that language, can mediate communication by paraphrasing what someone said, or by providing extra examples, or by clarifying a concept. So you mediate communication, or even when you mediate communication between one person who speaks the language and one person who doesn't speak the language. Um, so in that case, you're not necessarily a translator, a mere translator, because there are many other skills that you need for to help that communication happen. Sometimes you need other kinds of knowledge to make that communication happen. But if you think about using a foreign language, we do that all the time. As speakers of an additional language, we mediate communication between other people, and this is something we do not very frequently focus on in our classes. So I don't remember seeing many activities like this in course books, for instance. Say you are talking to two people, one of whom doesn't speak English, and you have to help this person get by doing this, this, and that. So it's a very important skill that students need to develop, because this is how they ultimately use the language. Um, and this is definitely one of the active learning methodologies we can use, mediation, okay? And going back to hybrid learning, all of the active learning methodologies are very closely connected to, active learning. Active learning and technology um, have lots of things in common, right? They walk hand in hand. Now, going back to hybrid learning here, if we want to use hybrid learning, if we want to implement hybrid learning, there are certain decisions we have to make, right? So what are these decisions? The first one is, what is the best blend of face-to-face and online? So how much you want to do face-to-face and how much you want to do online, because it doesn't have to be 50-50 or 70-30 or 80-20. Uh, the best blend will depend. And the best methodologies. So what are the methodologies I'm going to use in my hybrid program? We saw a list of possible active learning methodologies, but there are other methodologies that we might want to use too. Okay, you have to analyze what works in your context. And then after we've decided on how much face-to-face, how much online, and the methodologies we want to use, there are some key questions we have to answer. The first of which is, what materials are going to be used and how are they going to be converted to online teaching? When we think about remote teaching, for instance, emergency remote teaching, which is what many teachers have been doing these days, we had our curriculum and we had our program, the materials we had been using, and then we simply went online. We changed the mode of delivery from face-to-face to online, but the materials continued the same. So we have to take a step back and think, all right, the materials I am using, the most appropriate for the hybrid context, or they need to be adapted, supplemented, or perhaps replaced. Of course, it's not possible to change the books in the middle of the course. It wouldn't have been possible to change the books we were using, for instance, when the pandemic hit. But it's something we might want to consider for future courses. So is the material the most appropriate for a blend of face-to-face and online? And if so, am I going to have to adapt it, supplement, convert, etc.? Then, what platforms and resources are available? It's important that if we use a blend of online and face-to-face, we develop a repertoire of online resources. teachers usually have a very good repertoire of face-to-face activities. We know what to do when we have 5 extra minutes. We know different kinds of warm-up activities, different games to use in class, different ways to present language. We have our tricks and mannerisms and everything. But when it comes to teaching online, because this isn't something we've been doing for a long time, and because this isn't something that most teachers were prepared for, like we didn't have online teaching at university, or we didn't learn how to teach online at the university, that's what I mean. Um, or we didn't take a course to teach us on how to teach online. Um, because of that, we still at times don't have such a varied repertoire of resources to use. So this is something we have to learn. Yes, like the presentation before mine, Ricardo was talking about Nearpod as a tool to use in online teaching. That's fantastic because you can implement um, so many different activities using the tool. And now it's part of your repertoire. It's something you can experiment with in your teaching next week. Like Andrea said, to, oh, I want to use these tools next week, this week in my teaching. That's pretty much the spirit, but it's important for us to get to know the tools and try to implement the tools and see how we can add variety to our online classes using these tools, okay? Then what will be offered online and what will be offered face-to-face. So if you're thinking about a language course, can you do speaking online? Yes, you can, but is this the best option? Well, maybe not. Maybe it's better to do writing online because it tends to be a more individual activity. So same thing happens to grammar versus reading. Which of these would you do online? You might want to make an informed decision here. The mode of delivery, so is it going to be synchronous, asynchronous? How much synchronous? How much asynchronous? What kind of synchronous? What kind of asynchronous? Yes, and who the learners are and what they need, because we have to remember that sometimes learners do not know how to use technology too. If you're teaching very young kids, at times they will need the help of the parents to be able to use tools online or to enter your online classroom. Or if you're teaching students who are not tech savvy, for instance, you might have to teach them how to do things. Or if I think about my context, for instance, I do lots of teacher training online, and at times the platform poses extra difficulties, and teachers do not know how to solve certain problems with the platform. You have to be able to help them with that. So we need to understand what the strengths and limitations in relation to the platform we're using or to the technology we are using are, and be prepared to help with that. Okay, this is important to consider before we start implementing the blend. And then once you have implemented your hybrid learning program, we have a few criteria to take into consideration to assess how effective or how appropriate our hybrid program has been. And here I have a list of things, a list of criteria, which are, some are self-explanatory, some not so much, but I'll briefly go through the list here with you. So how much can you adapt the content online? So if you think about face-to-face teaching, sometimes we plan a lesson and we think it's going to be a success, but we start the lesson and we realize it doesn't work. With our group of students that day, because students are tired, because students need extra explanations, or because they missed a class before. There are many reasons why a lesson plan might not work. And at times we have to adapt on the spur of the moment. Is it possible to adapt our online content? So this is something to take into account. How complex is the content online? Is it better for it to be a tad simpler? So at times, like, simpler is better online because students won't have the help of the teacher to help them in case they don't understand something. What's the balance between input and output. Online courses tend to have more input than opportunities for students to produce something. So there tends to be more input than output. So how are you going to make sure that the balance is appropriate? How much scaffolding is there in your online program? So how much do you pave the way for students to be given or for students to be presented with new content? Is there any opportunity for students to notice language in your online program, or it is more deductive? How much feedback can you give students online? What kind of interaction are you promoting with your online courses? Yes, how much can you automatize the process? How much can you personalize the process? What about the flow? Is it easy to follow the itinerary you created? So these are all concepts that we need to take into account here. Okay. And last but not least, whenever we think about a hybrid program, we need to think about the user experience. Here, there is this user experience wheel, which you can find online. If you just Google it, user experience wheel, which is a methodology course designers use to think about online programs and to validate and assess online programs in terms of findability, accessibility, usability, usefulness, etc. And then you have all of these criteria here to take into consideration. So it's a tool you have to assess your online courses. If you just Google user experience wheel, you will find this wheel with a very detailed explanation of each of the criteria. It's a very, very helpful tool for you to use, right? So the bottom line here is that it is important for you to reflect on your online teaching, your online component of your hybrid teaching, the same way you do with your face-to-face teaching, by using principled criteria like these to make sure that you're offering students the best experience possible. Right? So do you have any questions? If you do, I'll ask you to send them here in the chat, and then I'll answer them. Meanwhile, I'm gonna have some water. I don't think we have any questions then, right? Very good. So thank you very, very much for having me here today. If you want to ask me questions later, if you remember something you want to ask, or if you'd like to share your experience later, or maybe, I don't know, tell me what you've been doing in terms of hybrid teaching, you can send me an email at enrique@7idiomas.com.br. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure to be here this morning. It's already, daylight here. And yes, thank you.
Well, Enrique, we would like to thank you so much. Thank you for bringing such a relevant topic these days, yes. And from your talk, I could notice that many of us have been using some aspects of hybrid teaching, but maybe didn't know, yeah? And that was quite useful because we may continue working with hybrid teaching for some time, yeah?
No, we're definitely going to, I think, yes, because I mean, there are many different kinds of hybrid, and I don't see how we're going to go back to, only face-to-face without implementing technology in class, not even a little bit. So yes, you're right. You're definitely right.
Yeah, so that was quite helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I'd also like to thank you for being here with us and sharing this such relevant content that certainly will be very useful for all of us here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Enrique, it was an honor to have you here with us. Thank you very much for such an enlightening session.
Thank you for having me here.
Thanks, Henrique. Thank you. I'm feeling now much more confident and, you know, better informed for teaching hybrid lessons.
Mhm.
Thanks
Very
so much.
good. Very good.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much,
You can
everyone.
enjoy your bed now.
Yeah, I don't think I will. I think I'll do things, you know, enjoy
Alright.
daylight at this point. Yeah.
Yes, so great. That it must be
Thank you.
great to be there in Thailand. Yeah,
it's
enjoy your
good.
time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Henrique.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 And for all of you, dear board, thank you so much for one more event. Always great to be with you. We plan things together, but we also have fun together. And nothing would happen without all of you. I'd like to thank all the participants, the attendees, the panelists, the speakers, Henrique, and from my point of view, it was a very successful event, and I leave it full of ideas for my next week lessons.
Yeah, the same here, the same feeling here. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Andrea, Araceli, and Gladson. And it was awesome.
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, my dear friends from the board. Thank you for all the participants, and see you next time.
Yes, and this presentation, the whole event will be available on YouTube, on Brass Tissel's channel. So you can check that later. You can go back to the ideas presented here because it's quite hard to memorize everything because, wow, lots of things to put into practice. Yeah. So thank you so much. Good night, everyone. It was a great pleasure for us. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.